Good afternoon. I lament when looking around the Southern African landscape and seeing the children of Abantu. Aba means people of. Du is the supreme being. Their ancestors and forefathers traversed uncharted paths. They went through this crossroads, coming from Equatorial Guinea, coming from the Rift Valley, Embo, which means embryo, carrying bundles of seeds and herbs, learning from nature, learning from the waterfalls, from the falls, learning from the mountains, the valleys. And therefore, when I see their children today, obese, in pain from cancer, diabetes, I ask myself, who are these people? Are they truly the children of the people who traversed these mountains, of the people who populated this area, coming from these geographic spaces? There were many routes. I would not go into the many routes that were used, but I will tell you, we are here because our forefathers, our founding fathers, walked through the Abantu migration. Here we are today, speaking to you. I am Queen of Indigenous Knowledge. I come from the 1800s epochs. I'm the incarnate of the old soul of Queen Lazitse, who came into this country as King Somhlolo asked for a wife from the Ndwandwe kingdom, and King Zwide gave her King Lazitse. She birthed King Mswati II. I therefore I embody the cultural context of the 1800s epochs. I use this as a research instrument because I am able to reflect, rooted, founded on this previous life experience as Queen Lazitse. What do I mean? I mean, before we experienced umfekale, which has become our negative image, we had umdlathule, famine. We had a famine, we had drought. And therefore there was high competition for land resources. And as land people who learned along the Abantu migration how to harvest, how to plant and wait for the harvest, we were then found ourselves competing for the limited resources that existed at that time. And we wanted the right ecological spaces to be able to function in our indigenous foods. And after we experienced this mfekane, we experienced another devastating fact in history, and that is the Great Trek, which brought more and more competition on the natural resources. So our survival happened immediately. We're surviving this. Here comes the great track. What is the common interest? Land, knowledge, rivers, water, because we have to feed ourselves. And indigenous foods were the source of the major source of our sustenance. After this, we lost a lot of lives. Many people died, but we had to resettle. We had to relearn Ubuntu. I am because we are all related. We had to relearn under the circumstances we found ourselves. Conquests. We had to relearn Ubuntu. We had to relearn Ubuntu after writing concessions. We had to relearn. But it was all in our DNA because knowledge never disappears. It stays. We restored and we continued. How did we do that? We did that through various ways that I'll share with you. But what happened in history is that we had already learned rain dances. Umhlanga is a rain dance. Along the Abantu migration, when we were faced with terrains that were not productive, we learned to dance for rain. And we sent maidens to ask for rain. Where? At the reeds. Why the reeds? There is a Zulu and Swazi cosmology that teaches us that the origin of the first man is from the reeds. And you can imagine during the migrations how many other stories were there. But this one has stayed with us. And that's why we take maidens to ask for rain so that we can start planting and plowing from Umhlanga rain. And then next one becomes Ingwala, where now we get our male virgin boys to come and participate in this space, cutting lusegwane as a symbol that we're now looking for rain, for growing this, what we have planted. It was all centered around these indigenous foods. This is how we co-created with nature. We knew that through nature we can co-create. Because you know what? We had studied the ocean. That's why in September and in November, we go to the oceans. And it's a very important part of our learning from the migration. We learned, we studied the ocean. We know that in November and December, there's a cosmic great feed that only happens at that time. We also know that is the time for the mating of the coral. So we go and ask for the water that comes back to be part of this elaborate ceremony where we ask for growing rain. And then how do we celebrate all these indigenous foods? Marula, the first fruit. We celebrate through the first fruit because you cannot have the first fruit on an empty stomach. We have to have the fresh and first vegetables, the indigenous vegetables. This is how we created. This is how we dignified the land. This is how we dignified ourselves and the land, because the land is what feeds us. This is part of how we danced for the rain. And when I was now doing my research, I learned a lot about how so much has been systemically negated. I'd like you to pay attention to this picture. This picture is a true reflection of what has happened. We had all of this indigenous knowledge until 1935, when the British Parliament heard from this man. Yes, it's a contentious statement. Some say he went to India, some he says he went to Africa. Focus. Let's focus on the colonial legacy that came out of that. That the first thing missionaries came to do, they were the advanced party of the colonial. They came to convert us and destroy our indigenous knowledge systemically. So pay attention to this guy, because he's one very living, captured example of what really happened to Africa. We had to systemically be told that whatever is African is barbaric, and whatever comes from Europe and elsewhere is the right thing to follow. And this is why me and you find ourselves in these spaces where we're reigniting that knowledge. Colonialism is founded on these principles. They systemically negated our indigenous knowledge. We systemically negated ourselves because we were part of that education system that erased the culture and the historical context and the indigenous context. And today, when I ask people, and I say, let us decolonize, I come from this perspective. That let us indigenize, I come from this perspective. Let us Africanize, because what was erased from us is coming back to haunt us. And this is why it's extremely important for you to look at this picture and walk away and say, this is where it all began, officially, in documents and all of that. So when I say let us decolonize, let us decolonize our stomachs. Let us go back to those indigenous foods and understand that when colonialism came, it took away the land. It took us into servants' quarters where we couldn't plant our indigenous foods. It took us into security and teachers' quarters. It took us into locations. It took us into geospaces, geographically, that you cannot plant. And what did we become as Africans? We became the consumption market. So what was brought to us, which we need to understand to decolonize our stomach, is that we are all eating very refined foods and not indigenous foods. So when I say let us indigenize our stomachs, I am saying backyard gardens, can we have this systemically negated indigenous foods? Okra. Let us have backyard gardens that are reflective of the fact that we want to indigenize our stomachs. Okra is a very healthy indigenous vegetables. And the next okra, which is also one of the top 10 best vegetables, nutritional value. So if we indigenize the stomach, we are mitigating those risks that I talked about earlier. The risk of obesity, the risk of cancer, the risk of diabetes. And most fundamentally, we're managing our own poverty because we are feeding ourselves and with foods that are healthy for us, that are good for our DNA. So when I say let us Africanize our indigenous veg, this is what I would like to see in every home. This is a pharmacy, a mobile pharmacy, because it has all the indigenous foods that you need for your life. And this is where we're going with this, is that if you decolonize your stomach, you indigenize your stomach, you Africanize it, then you can integrate, because we are not suggesting that you get rid of what you already know. Modernity is here to stay. I'm an integrator of indigenous and modernity. And when I talk about an Africanized stomach, is that one that can take both worlds and integrate it and eat like an African, because we are not going to erase what has been a lifetime that we've been enjoying. But we just need to know there is value in our indigenous, and this is how we can go back and integrate. And as founding president of the Indigenous Knowledge Hub, I argue that integrating of indigenous knowledge and modernity is the way to go. What are we looking for? We're looking for a new kind of leader in Africa, a leader that's confident, a leader that can sit in any table and argue, because this leader is decolonized, indigenized, and Africanized in the stomach. We're looking for a different kind of worker. We're looking for a different kind of businessman because this person is eating for their DNA and is taking into consideration that whatever they are consuming is mitigating health risks that I have spoken so much about, and also increasing their nutritional value. As we continue and go on further, I always joke and say, this is the most legal green vegetable you can have in the market. Let us think smart and think about this green vegetables, this leafy life that you can sell legally all over the world. As I stand here, I stand and say, as an African futurist, Africa's future and wealth will come from trading indigenous vegetables. I have seen technologies that dry them according to standards that have been developed. So this is the future of Africa. And you know why I say that? It's because when colonialism came, they missed this cash crop. Now it's time for us in Africa to take a conscious decision of turning this into a cash crop. It's not a cash crop. It's struggling in the market. Why? Because we haven't created enough awareness. And the first call that we need to go to is our own children. All of you here today must create the demand for these indigenous vegetables, must create that space for these indigenous vegetables and indigenous foods to become trendy. And I'm so happy I'm talking to young people. We are looking for young farmers. We are looking for women. Women are healers of the home. What you put in the kitchen will heal your family. We're looking for people who will take this to that next level of saying, this is going to be the next big cash crop. This is the future of Africa. And when I'm saying this, we have to develop internal markets. There are children in this country who have never seen these indigenous vegetables. And we have to start thinking about how we take it out there. Not only that, we have the Africa trade. Intra-Africa trade is here. And we know, and we've learned from the ecologists, that geographic areas are best suited for certain crops. Let us develop the crops and sell the dried vegetables that are coming here. The concept of value chains is all over. Africa is talking about value chain that. Let's use it and come up in the Africa trade space and inter-trade amongst ourselves. And I'd like everybody in this room today to go away having been transformed. Let's stop thinking that the African diaspora is a brain drain. It's not. It's a market. If you further process this and sell it to the international market, like the Zambian success story, these are selling internationally because they have further processed them. They've put their thoughts and minds into how they can process them for value chain. And they're selling it to the African diaspora. So if the African diaspora stays in the international space, let us start thinking of them as the market, because these are the products that can go into the international space. All the standards have been assessed, and it is time for Africa to acknowledge that. And lastly, before I leave, there is the whole industry of international plant-based lifestyles. We have the vegetables, we have the foods, We have the beans, we have all these foods that can become part of the international market. So, we eliminate our own poverty because we started considering that indigenous vegetables and indigenous foods are worthy to be called cash crops. And we open up the market in Africa and internationally. It is therefore my humble expression of saying, let us decolonize, indigenize, and Africanize the stomach and make this an international business. I thank you.